her, and she said she would forward it to Chris. And we were basically just asking for copies of everything where we could clear this matter up, and, you know, like I said, we wanted our suspicion to be wrong.
Is that item already in evidence? I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 440 to your testimony. And again, just tell me, first of all, just without going into any content, whether or not you recognize that particular document.
I do. It's a text strand between myself and Vicki Lyman.
All right. And is this, what is the date on that particular text strand?
June 2nd, and then it runs into June 3rd.
All right. And is that 2021?
Yes, I'm sorry, 2021.
And is this a text thread where y'all are discussing the things that you've described here today?
Yeah, I told her I just, you know, don't mention it, anything.
Hold on, just real quick.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Y'all are describing what we're talking about here today?
That is correct.
All right, Your Honor, at this time I would move Stage 440 into evidence.
Your Honor, object on hearsay grounds. It doesn't fall within an exception to the hearsay rule.
See the document. Yes, sir. Sustain the objection. Did you ultimately text Vicki on that particular day?
I did. I told her that I gave her time to get back from vacation, and I just basically texted her with my concerns and told her how stressed out I had been over this situation and how I was hoping my suspicion was wrong, but I was really stressed out. And unfortunately, my daughter, me and Vicki had talked on the phone. Vicki had called me as well, and unfortunately, my daughter had overheard me too. So she instantly got like really worried for me. And my daughter said, "Mom, you need to go ahead and get your resume because once you turn all this in, they may fire you." So she was very concerned for me.
And this latest email on the screen, that was June 2nd, 2021. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
You recall June 7th, 2021.
I do.
Was that a Monday?
It was.
Were you at work that day?
I was.
Did the defendant come to work that day?
He did. He came in probably around lunchtime. I can't remember if he came in before lunch or after, but somewhere in that time frame.
Did you see Jeannie Seconder that day?
I did. Jeannie had already told me that she was going to talk to Alec about the Ferris e-checks that were missing. She was going to go and talk to him about them that day, and so she asked me to let her know when he got into the office. So when he got to the office, I reached out to her to let her know.
And did she come up to your area?
She did, and we have open style offices, no doors on the secretary's offices. So she had to pass by me to get Alec's office. So I saw her when she was walking past.
Did she give you any look when she walked past?
She did. It was kind of just like that, just kind of a raised eyebrow, like wish me luck, here goes nothing kind of look. Like, I hope, because we were both just, like I said, wanting to get answers and
get answers about what?
About those missing checks and figure out what was going on.
Where did she go after she gave you that look?
I heard Alec's door closed, so I assumed in his office to talk to him.
This is what day?
This is June 7th, 2021.
Did she come out after?
She did, and she didn't stop. She just hurried by my desk, and she went on about her business.
Did you have any conversation yourself about the Ferris fees with the defendant that day?
Don't recall having any discussion with him on that day. At that point, I turned, Jeannie had everything, and it was kind of in her hands.
What time do you think you left work that day?
I left at 5:15 that day.
Is that your normal time?
It's not. I typically work later. Alec always tend to work nights, and me and Christy tend to kind of adapt to his schedule a little bit and work a little later than 5 o'clock. Most of the time, we were there till 5:30, 6 o'clock.
When you left the office on June 7th, 2021 at 5:15, was the defendant still there?
He was.
Did you go home? Eventually went home?
Yes.
Just a normal night?
Yeah, I went straight home that night.
Did that change at some point?
Yes, it definitely. My phone was on silence, and I slept through a bunch of text messages and calls. I woke up in the middle of the night, and my phone was just full, and I was like, what is going on? And so I'm looking through the text messages. They don't make a lot of sense. I see I have a voicemail message from Randy Murdaugh. And so I checked the voicemail, and I could tell he was upset and crying, and he said, Annette, please call me when you can. It doesn't matter what time. And so I don't remember what time it was, but it was sometime in the middle of the night, and I called him. And he told me, well, when he answered the phone, he was upset, obviously, and I said, Randy, what's wrong? And he said, it's bad, Annette, it's real bad. And I said, oh no, Mr. Randolph passed? And he said, no, it's not Dad, it's Maggie and Paul. And I said, what? And he said, they've been shot and murdered. And I said, what? And it was very overwhelming. We both cried on the phone with each other, and obviously the first thing I did was say, oh my God, how is Alec? How is he? Is he okay? Where's Buster? Is Buster okay? I was very concerned. I had a million thoughts running in my head. I was like, are you guys safe? Is this something aimed at the entire family? And I was very, very worried about Alec and Buster and Randy and his family and the entire Murdaugh family. So it was very overwhelming.
Over the 9 years of working closely for the defendant, did you also get to know his family, Maggie and Paul and Buster?
I did.
Is this firm pretty tight-knit?
Yes.
What was the reaction of the people in the firm to this terrible news?
There was two reactions. First was scared. We were like, please lock our doors. We're scared. Who is this aimed at? Is it a client retaliating? Is it, aimed at Alec? Is it aimed at the firm? We didn't know. We just had so many questions, no answers, a million thoughts running through our heads. We were just there, supporting each other and helping one another through this grieving process, and at the same time, we were very protective over Alec and Randy. We wouldn't let them leave the office if strange cars were driving around. We would say, don't walk out yet. There's a white car that's went around 3 times. I mean, we were in complete mama bear mode. We didn't want them to go out and have to talk to reporters. We didn't want them to have to run out and run into anybody, and we were scared for them. We were very protective. I mean, anything suspicious out the window, we were on high alert.
Said, what kind of mode?
Mama bear mode.
Mama bear protecting who?
Protecting Alec and Randy.
Did the law firm community rally to the aid of the defendant?
They did.
Was that the primary focus on everybody's mind in the aftermath?
Absolutely.
Were you at all concerned about finding out what happened to these Ferris fees after that happened?
What Ferris fees?
What Ferris fees?
Yeah, what Ferris fees? That was the furthest thing on my mind.
In fact, was that the last time you really thought about it in any aspect until September of 2021?
It is, yes, sir.
And you were more focused on helping this defendant and his family in the aftermath of this tragedy that had happened.
Yes. And everybody was so supportive. I mean, some of the associate attorneys stepped up and they came up to me and Christy and said, hey, you know, if you need anything over the next few weeks, you need us to review a file for you, get something else, sign it, and get it out the door. We're here for you guys 100%. So it wasn't, you know, we were supportive, and then we had other folks in the office that were coming up to us, supporting us as well, because they knew we were at a standstill. What do we do? You know, because we knew obviously he was not going to be the same and not be himself for quite a while.
I asked you earlier about the boat case. Before the murders, when the boat case happened, had there been some reaction and backlash in the community against the defendant and his family after the boat case?
Yes, it was very difficult because Hampton being a small town, we all know each other and we all know both sides for the most part. For instance, Mallory Beach, her father is my first cousin. So Mallory Beach, I was kind of felt like I was in between a rock and a hard place because, you know, her family is, you know, beyond heartbroken over the loss of her. And I know some of them didn't like the idea that I was still working at the firm, but I was still, to me, it was two separate entities. This is my job, this was my family, and I had to keep them separate. I didn't want any part of the boat wreck case. I didn't want to know any details or anything because, like I said, I was keeping my family life and my work life separate.
After the murders, you said the law firm community, though, rallied to Alex's aid, correct?
Absolutely, everybody.
Did the larger community do as well?
Yes, they did.
After the murders?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that after those murders happened, what Ferris fees? They were the farthest thing from your mind, correct?
Yes, sir.
When did they come back to your attention?
September 2nd, it was a Thursday in the afternoon, and I was looking for a file in the file cabinet, and I was unable to locate it. And lots of times if, you know, Alex talking to a client on the phone, he'll yell for a file and we'll take it to him. So I was like, oh, it's probably in his office. So I went to his office to look for the file, and when I found it, I picked it up, and when I did, a check kind of floated like a feather to the ground. And when I bent over to pick it up, I saw the check and what it said and had on it, and I instantly became very upset because it happened to be one of the checks from the Ferris case that didn't exist.
And what did you see on the check that let you know that stuck out in your mind?
It was from Chris Wilson's office. It was written to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, and at the bottom it said Ferris fees. And it was dated March.
So what did you realize at that point?
I said, he's been lying this whole time. He had these funds. He lied to me. That feeling in the back of my mind was correct. Unfortunately, he did take these funds because when I flipped the check over, I also saw that he had deposited by mobile deposit, and I can't remember if he signed the back of the check or if it just said mobile deposit only.
Let me show you stage 313, see if you recognize that. It's already in evidence.
Yes, sir. That's the check that I found on September 2nd.
Right. And if you flick up one side, or the other side.
Yeah, it's got his signature, Bank of America deposit only.
You recognize that writing as the defendant's?
Yes, it is.
When that check fluttered down, you picked it up?
I did.
You saw that? Where did you take it? Did you take it anywhere?
Yeah, I went back to my desk, and you can imagine all the emotions that I was feeling at this point. You know, I was hurt. I was angry. I just was beside myself, and I was a bit enraged too because I asked him so many times. There were so many times that I felt like we could have clarified this and got it taken care of, but here it is from March to September, and I find this check that supposedly did not exist. And so I went to my desk, I called Jeannie, and I was like, I just found something. And she said, oh, shit, what did you find? And I said, are you busy? And she said, come on over. And I went over and closed her door and threw the check at her, and she was like, is this one? I said, yeah, that's one of the fairest checks that doesn't exist.
Was Jeannie doing anything else or start doing anything else when you came down with that check?
I didn't know it until I took her the check, but when I took her the check, she was like, yeah, I just ran a report yesterday, and she said, one of the attorneys is going to call Michael Gunn later today. And I said, well, what do you mean? And that's when she told me that she thinks there's some more stuff too. Back to my suspicion with Hirschberger and Thomas Moore, she pulled a report and she found out that we may have other issues of stolen funds. But I was not aware of any of that. I didn't know that she was looking into it again. I didn't know any of that until I took her the check and she said she had just started doing stuff within the last few days.
Within a few days of this happening, what happened to the defendant's employment at the law firm?
He was fired the next day.
And did the law firm engage in a review process to determine the extent of any alleged?
Yes, we've had months upon months of going through all of the files and finding, just following the numbers and making notes on everything, and lots of hours, lots of manpower involved in this process of putting everything together, and just in awe of how much was happening, and we had no idea about it.
And without going through all the exhibits that were gone through with Jeannie Seconder, but she was the one, or one of the central ones in doing that review, is that correct?
Of course, yes.
And without going through each one, is a lot of those disbursements for the fake forge account, those were disbursements that the defendant told you to put on there?
That's correct.
Are those a lot of those disbursements one where he corrected you and said, no, don't put Forge Consulting, put Forge?
Yes, they were.
A lot of those checks, ones where he said, oh, I'm going to see Michael Gunn later, I'll take the check myself.
Yeah, they were all for him.
I'll show you what's been marked as Exhibit 441. Again, without going into the contents, tell me if you recognize that document.
Yes, this text message that Alex sent to me and Christy on September 26th, when he was in 2021, when he was in rehab, is my understanding.
All right. Your Honor, this time I'd offer States 441 into evidence, I believe without objection.
No objection.
Submitted without objection.
Your Honor, I apologize. We do have the 403 objection, and subject to the court's prior ruling on this.
I haven't seen the exhibit. I don't.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you go to the jury room for a break. Please do not discuss the case. Yes, sir, Mr. Griffin.
Just preserving our prior objections on 404B evidence under 404B and 403. And it's nothing new. I just forgot to state no additional objections than what we've already had in this line of testimony, this is the same line of testimony of financial misconduct. That's all.
Mr. Waters?
And I just clarified, I think, with the defense counsel that he was not adding a specific 403 objection to that. It's just the prior objection. However, this is a text from the defendant to this witness in this particular instance. Certainly, it can be read, and there's no hearsay issue because obviously it's a statement of a party opponent, and it certainly also is relevant because it can certainly be read in the nature of an admission to the various things that are at issue in these particular proceedings. And for that reason, there's certainly the probative value of an admission is certainly, I would argue, is the probative value of that is not substantially outweighed by the danger of any unfair prejudice.
It introduces another issue, the issue of drug use, and I think the witness testified that he was in rehab. Is that what you said? That he was in rehab and sent an email, and just want to be clear from the defense that the part of it, of the testimony that establishes through this witness that he was in rehab, that is not a basis for your objection.
We do have, yes, we do object to evidence of his drug use and to be included in this, and we would ask that that document be redacted to the extent it references rehab at this time.
It doesn't specifically mention drug use. So, have you all review the exhibit and tell me if you have no objection based on the fact that he sent it while in rehab, then it's admissible as far as your prior bad acts objection.
We don't have any additional objections, Your Honor. We would, because this does raise an additional character issue asked of the court. We ask that the court give, additional limiting instruction at some point in time about that.
How does the character in that he saying he's getting better, or what part addresses character?
Well, certainly he says I'm getting better every day, and it's clear from that he's in rehab. That's all.
All right, Mr. Waters.
Your Honor, he doesn't expressly say that. I would point out that the issue of pills has already come up a few times in this trial. I'm not trying to go there, but it is, when we talk about 404 and res geste, it is kind of part and parcel of a lot of things. Even the defense has examined, I believe, Ms. Seconder on the issue of pills. And on top of that, we had Chris Wilson, who testified in camera, who will also testify here today. One of the things he says when he had that confrontation with the defendant on the the afternoon, I believe, of September 4th, that the defendant said, yeah, I've been stealing money and I've been hooked on pills for a while. So this is a bridge I think we have to cross at some point. The state is not trying to gild the lily with that, but at least with these various witnesses, it is part of what they're being said. As far as that specific exhibit, though, Your Honor. There's no express reference to drugs or anything like that, and it certainly is in the nature of admission. And again, I think for that reason, it's very probative and very relevant and admissible for that reason.
Well, my concern obviously is that we do not, or that I do not allow testimony involving these admissions to bleed so far into the character 403 that it has the effect of undoing the 404, 403 analysis. A lot of testimony has come in unobjected to that touches upon the defendant's character. That's why I want to be clear on what the objection is.
Your Honor, just from the state's perspective, we are trying to, walk that line. I mean, there's a lot of the financial stuff we're not even seeking to admit. I think that we've limited it to things that had that connection that we discussed in camera. So, I'm not trying to gild the lily.
I'm not sure what that means.
That's a phrase I learned from Chief Justice Toll over the years. I guess that means piling on, I guess, is a way to do that. And again, I don't have, we recognize the situation we're in and trying obviously not to get out over our skis from what the admissibility of that the court has already ruled on.
All right. I'll ponder it while we take our break, and we'll be in recess for about 15 minutes. Ma'am, you may step down. Do not discuss your testimony.
seated.
All right, to this exhibit number 441, I find that it is admissible under Rule 801 by a party opponent. However, the portion of it that says, when I get out of here is problematic. If the defense would like that portion of it redacted, that would suggest that he's in rehab and when he gets out of here, he's going to do this or that. We can redact that portion. If the defense does not wish to have that portion redacted, the exhibit will come in its entirety.
Your Honor, here's where we find ourselves on the defense side. His drug addiction and drug use is, frankly, res gestae to the alleged criminal conduct on the financial fraud. And it's hard for us on the defense side, and it didn't really get flushed out in our in-camera hearing because they didn't put evidence up of this, but it's something that we all knew. But it is part and parcel of the financial crimes, and it explains why he did what he did. And it does, in a way, pile on and make it even more prejudicial. And so when considering that, Your Honor, what we would ask is we want to renew our motion, object to all the financial crimes. Now that we know drug use is coming in the midst of it, because it is res gestae, it does tell the entire story, and we would ask the court to strike all the financial testimony the court's heard thus far, and let's proceed with a murder trial.
Well, that motion is denied.
Thank you.
But the portion, the court admits this document and will redact that portion if requested by the defense. Do you want to redact the portion that suggests that he was in rehab? You says it's part of the res gestae. It may even be part of your defense. I don't know. The state is offering evidence, and
We're not asking it to be redacted. We would request that whenever we get in these 404B witness testimony that the court provide a limiting instruction. Thank you.
well, I'm not going to give a limiting instruction prior to every witness's testimony or in the middle of every witness's testimony. The court has given the limiting instruction twice and will do so at the end of the case as well. And there may be other instances, but not at every juncture where evidence is being offered.
Yes, sir.
All right, so this exhibit is admitted. You may bring the jury. Thank you. The objection is overruled. The exhibit is admitted.
May it please the court, Your Honor. Just very quickly, when we left off States 441, now admitted into evidence, this was a text you received from the defendant, is that right?
That's correct.
And the date on that is September 26th?
September 26th, yes.
Is that 2021?
It is.
Is this the text of that text that the defendant sent to you?
It is.
I only have a couple more questions for you. Before I get to the end, one question I wanted to ask you was, what was the defendant's cell phone usage like?
He was always on his phone, always on his cell phone, always on his office phone. He would quit one conversation and grab another. Sometimes he would have both phones to his ear.
Would it be unusual for the defendant to go anywhere without a cell phone with him?
Absolutely.
I want to play for you what's been admitted to evidence as States 297. Let me have this input, please.
Get it. Get that. Quit, Cash. Quit. It's okay. Come here. Come here, Cash. Come here. Touch it. Cash. Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth. Hey, Bubba. It's a guinea. This is a chicken. Come here, Cash. Cash. Quit.
Do you recognize any voices from that video?
I do. I hear three voices.
And tell me who you hear.
I hear Paul Murdaugh, Maggie Murdaugh, and Alex Murdaugh.
And how sure are you?
I'm 100% sure.
Can I have the Elmo one more time, please?
I'm sorry. Oh.
Going back to States 441, can you read just that one sentence starting where my finger's pointing that the defendant sent to you?
The worst part is knowing I did the most damage to those I love the most.
Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Good morning.
Ms. Griswold, were you hired by Alec to work at the law firm?
I was hired by the firm, but he was in one of the meetings and it was my understanding that I was going to be working for him.
Right. And so you interviewed with him?
I did.
And you've been working, well, you worked with him for?
About 9 years.
9 years.
Yes, sir.
And 1 second, left my. My understanding is that you moved back to Hampton because your you had your father was ill,
My father was ill, yes, sir.
and then so you moved your family back, you and your husband, and
Right, my husband and my daughter and I moved to be closer to my dad and help my mom with him.
and you got a job working at the law firm, and did you work exclusively for Mr. Alex Murdaugh?
Most, yes. I mean, there was other attorneys that I might do some work for here and there, but primarily Alex was who my attorney was.
And if you needed to take time off for personal matters, would you just have to run it by Alex?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And he put family first at work, did he not?
Most of the time, yes,
And he encouraged you to put your family first.
absolutely.
And I think your husband had a heart attack. He was in the hospital for quite some time.
Yes, for 5 weeks before he ultimately passed away.
And I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
But Alec encouraged you to do all you needed to do to care for him and don't worry about work. Isn't that right?
Yes, he did.
And you didn't miss a paycheck.
I sure didn't.
Is he a good person to work for?
It was hit or miss. I cared about him. I respected him. I loved him. You know, you can't be that close and work with somebody without having, developing feelings for them and their family members.
Right.
But it was hard to work for him sometimes. He was a bit erratic, and for all the respect and love I had for him, it was still very difficult to work for him.
I think your description was he was like a Tasmanian devil that would come through at the end of the day.
He would.
And he was frenetic.
Yes.
Okay, and but people came to him if they needed something, right?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
And so he had a lot of people coming, and did he ever say no to anybody's request?
He didn't know the word no.
Right. And well, he would want to schedule his appointments around his family's commitments, wouldn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, if the Buster and Paul had baseball season, he'd be sure to block all that out off his calendar, wouldn't he?
Most of the time. Sometimes he didn't tell us about personal matters or things where they were going until the day of or whatever, and we would have to reschedule stuff. But if it was on the calendar, yes, he was going to be there for anything that the boys had going on.
He put in his work life family first. Is
Yes,
that right?
that's correct.
You would agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that.
And you got to know Maggie, did
I
you
did.
not?
Yes, sir.
And she was thoughtful for you on your birthday and anything you had going on?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think you mentioned the Ferris trial in Columbia. That was in Columbia, wasn't it?
That was, yes, sir.
And you went to the trial, didn't you?
I did.
And you remember Alec going up on a Sunday, and he spent the night in the hospital because his dad was going to have surgery the next day?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it seems like it's been a
And then-
long time, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Maggie came up on Monday and stayed with him during the trial, right?
I never did see her. Our paths never crossed because I was kind of in work mode, but I know she was there.
Right. And he traveled frequently with Maggie on work trips, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
And he would take his family to conventions and when they would have work, right?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And Alec wasn't the type of guy that would go off on a guy's trip. His trips were family trips.
I mean, I don't know that without a shadow of a doubt, but I know a lot of his trips were family related, something with him and Maggie, or him and Maggie and the boys and their significant others.
Right. And he was real close with Maggie's family too, wasn't he?
Yes, it appeared that they were very close.
And if Mr. Brandstatter's, Maggie's dad, couldn't get in touch with Alec on his cell phone, he would call you and ask, where's Alec?
Yeah, he would call myself or Christy and say, hey, can you get Alec to give me a call? Yeah.
And they communicated quite frequently, didn't
They did.
they? And did you meet Mr. and Ms. Brenstetter?
I didn't meet him until, we had Mr. Randolph he got the, what
Order
was
of the
it?
Palmetto?
Yeah, and that's when I met them. That was the first time I'd ever met Maggie's parents.
And if Alec was in even a deposition, and if Maggie or Paul or Buster would call, I mean, he would walk out and take the call, wouldn't he?
I never was present with them. I've heard rumors of such, but I was never present with him at depositions and mediations.
Well, in the office, if he was in a meeting, he would always
yeah.
take their calls, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. Yes.
Never say, "Oh gosh, tell her I'd call her back." He'd
No,
take her call.
he never put off calls with his family. He always talked to them.
Now, you were talking about the night that you learned that Maggie and Paul were murdered, that you thought when you first got the call that it was about Mr. Randolph.
Correct.
And we're talking about Mr. Randolph Murdaugh,
That's correct.
Alex and Randy's dad,
Yes, sir.
because it was well known that he had just been put back in the hospital and his condition was not well.
Yeah, it was my understanding that at that point the family was making arrangements to bring him home, and hospice may be involved. And so obviously we were all expecting awful news.
And he, in fact, did die on Thursday, June 10th, I believe.
I believe so too, yes, sir.
Right. And after that, you said that the whole law firm rallied around not just Alec, but Alec and Randy and their families.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's
And we rallied around each other because we were scared, we were worried.
Right. And then after, well, I guess there was like a tidal wave of media surrounding the law firm at some point in time, was there?
Yes, sir.
And so y'all had to, be careful with comings and goings, and that was kind of scary, I take it.
It was. We ended up having to lock the front door because they would just walk in and just overwhelm the receptionist. So it became like a daily habit there for a few weeks. So we had to end up locking the door.
And as a result of Maggie and Paul's tragic murder, Alex Murdaugh became front and center of a media spotlight, didn't he?
He did, yes, sir.
And it wasn't, and there were cameras outside the office frequently, right?
There were, yes, sir.
And there were cameras out at Moselle.
I think so. I didn't go out there, but I'm assuming they probably were.
And all the buzz was about Alex Murdaugh and what happened to Maggie and Paul, right?
Yes, sir.
And all the while you were around Alec on occasion, and you noticed his demeanor, and he was grieving greatly, was he not?
He was grieving, and he was also very humble. He had changed dramatically. Afterwards he was more mellow, and he would come in the mornings, and instead of yelling Christy, Annette, and telling us what to do, he would actually come to our desk and say hello and check on us, and we would in turn check on him. So he was very different after the murders.
And he had a hard time working after the murders?
Absolutely, yeah, as you can imagine.
Sure. And you're aware, and you had to keep up with his whereabouts, but he spent a lot of time with Maggie and Maggie's parents?
Yeah, he would tell me that he had weekend plans, and I would hear him on the phone with his in-laws and making plans to meet up for the weekend.
And he stayed in Somerville a good bit with Buster, with Maggie's parents?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And he and Buster traveled up to the upstate, to Lake Huey or something? Are you aware of that?
I remember him saying, the family had had property or something up there, his in-laws, and they were all getting together.
And you're aware that Alec would not spend a single night after Maggie and Paul were murdered at Moselle.
Yes, sir. I knew that.
And when he was working in Hampton, he was either commuting from Somerville, Edisto, or staying with his brother Randy, or something like that.
I knew he was either staying with family or, he was coming back from Somerville or Greenville from being with the in-laws, but that's all I knew.
But he never spent one night more at Moselle.
Not as far as I know, yes, sir.
Now, you were asked questions by Mr. Waters about the Ferris matter was the furthest thing from your mind after the murder of Maggie and Paul, right?
Yes, sir.
And that you didn't do any more about that after Maggie and Paul's murder, right?
That's correct.
But I think you also said that you conveyed your concerns to Jeannie Seconder, and that she essentially took over.
Yes, when I gave it to her, I knew she told me she would take it from there, and so I know I gave it to her, and that was that.
And so there's really nothing more for you to do on the Ferris matter after you turned it over to Jeannie, right?
Correct.
And then you were in Alex's office one day looking for a file, and you stumbled across this canceled check.
Yes, sir. It must have been underneath the file. I wanted in between that and something else, so when I lifted my file, it fluttered to the floor.
And and you felt, I think you talked to this jury about how this whole thing put you in a bad spot, and your daughter said you need to dust your resume off or something like that.
That's
right?
correct. Yes, sir. I was worried. I was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping that my gut feeling was wrong, and that what I was looking at was not money being stolen, and that he was not doing that. I was hoping I was wrong, but at the same time, I was scared to turn it in, because what if they, look into it and it's nothing, there's nothing going on, and then, it disturbs the relationship we had working together, and, what would I do? Would I be able to stay at the firm after turning him in on something so bad that he could lose his job over it? So I was concerned. I was concerned for my livelihood. I'm a single mom with a teenage daughter.
And nothing happened to your job, right?
No, sir. Nothing happened to my job.
It's Alex who lost his job, right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And you mentioned in what's in the evidence as Defendant's Exhibit number 441 is a text that you received from Alex, right?
That's correct.
And was it just to you, or was it you and
me and Christy, his other secretary.
The other secretary. And the date is Sunday, September 26th at 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned it was from Rehab.
Yes, as far as I knew, it was Rehab. I assumed it was probably one of the steps of reaching out to those that you hurt and telling them you're sorry.
And Alec was in Rehab?
Yes, sir. As far as I know, he was.
Okay. And I want you to read this to the jury, the whole email, if you don't mind,
Okay,
please.
sure. Hey, it's Alec. I'm finally feeling a little better each day. I'm over the worst, but still feel like I have the flu. Real weak. I have been worried about y'all, and I'm sorry I didn't get to tell y'all myself. I know both of you been hurt badly by me. I know it sounds hollow, but I am truly sorry. The better I get, the more guilt I have. I have an awful lot to try to make right when I get out of here. The worst part is knowing I did the most damage to those I love the most. I'm not real sure how I let myself get where I did. I'm committed to getting better and hope to mend as many relationships as I can. You both are special people and important to me. Please know how sorry I am to have made you part of my misdeeds. I hope you are doing as well as possible. I love you very much. Please tell Cheryl and Haley hello, and I'm sorry. All my love.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Very quickly, Your Honor. Mr. Griffin asked you about whether or not you were worried about losing your job over these Ferris fees. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then he asked you the defendant lost his job, right?
That's correct.
After the murders, but before September, the defendant still had his job, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He still had his law license, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
You said, in response to defense counsel's question, that people came to him if they needed something, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. He was trusted by everybody, and they knew that if they needed something, all they had to do was reach out, and he was going to help them.
He was trusted by everybody. Did you trust him?
I trusted him. Yes, sir.
People came to him for anything, like all these clients right here?
Yes, sir.
He was a prominent lawyer,
Yes, he was.
one of the most prominent in the region.
Yes.
And all of that came to an end in September 2021 when all of that came out, did it not?
Right. When I found the check, I knew that he had lied to me and that he'd stolen that money.
Thank you. You may step down. You may call your next witness.
Johnny James for the state. State calls Michael Gunn.
Mr. Gunn.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You can have a seat on the seat. Adjust that microphone, adjust your seat. And just state your name again and spell your last name, please.
Sure. It's Michael Gunn. Last name is spelled G-U-N-N.
Good morning, Mr. Gunn.
Good morning.
Just barely morning. Where are you from, Mr. Gunn?
From Columbia.
Born and raised?
Oh, grew up in Conway, South Carolina.
Oh, grew up in Conway, South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
All right. Where you work?
Work for Forge Consulting.
And what is Forge Consulting?
Forge Consulting, we are a settlement planning firm based primarily in Atlanta. I run the Columbia or South Carolina office, and we work with people, plaintiffs and plaintiffs' attorneys, to help them really try to take the settlements that have been recovered for them and try to make them make these settlements last a long time. These people normally have been in catastrophic injuries or wrongful death of a loved one.
So your company works with law firms who represent people who've been hurt, and if they get a little bit of money to make them whole, you can help make that money last a longer time. Is that an accurate summary of what you just described?
Yes, sir, and that's the goal.
All right. When did you first start working for Forge Consulting, or do you work for Forge Consulting, or did you found it?
I'm one of the principals in Forge Consulting. We started in 2003. I've been there since 2005.
And what is your actual, you said you're a principal, what is your actual title at Forge Consulting?
I would be a principal and settlement consultant.
Okay. And so do you work directly with the attorneys yourself in arranging some of these settlements and structures and things of that nature?
Yes, sir, I do.
So if you could, what exactly is a structured settlement in a summary form?
Sure, kind of a primer on it. Essentially, a structured settlement is when it's only available to those who've been, first of all, to those who've been injured or involved in a wrongful death or workers' compensation. It's really a method for them to try and save money. And what I mean by that is when they get the settlement, they have an opportunity to put some of that money into almost like an annuity. And that annuity would pay them over time, much like a paycheck, because a lot of these folks have lost their jobs, they've lost a loved one, or they have bills to pay. And so by doing that, it allows them to receive that money, but not only do they receive the funds, they do receive them tax-free from the federal government.
Totally tax-free?
Totally tax-free, with interest.
Now, who actually funds these annuities that ultimately get paid out to those who've been hurt?
Sure. Well, generally speaking, the annuities are funded by the insurance company that's paying the claim or the defendant themselves. That's generally speaking.
And when they pay that claim, where does that money go in order to fund the annuity? Does it go to Forge Consulting?
The only way it would go to Ford's Consulting is if the check was made payable to that insurance company, and then we would forward the check on to that insurance company.
So in that instance, you wouldn't actually be really taking the money. You'd just be stuffing it in an envelope.
We'd be a
and
mail
sending it on.
carrier. We'd just be a mail carrier, correct.
And I apologize. We're both speaking pretty quickly here. Madam Court Reporter can only record one of us at a time. So if I'm asking a question, try and let me complete it and then answer
No problem.
thereafter.
Yep.
So to clarify, the only instance where you would get any money is if the check is made out to an insurance company, you stuff it in another envelope and send it on its way.
That's correct.
But ultimately, the money comes from the insurance company to whoever's funding this annuity. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, yes.
And the people funding this annuity would be another insurance company or some other firm of that nature. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that would be the structuring of monies awarded in a lawsuit to the person hurt. What about monies awarded to the lawyer in a lawsuit? What about an attorney's fees? Can those be structured?
They can be.
All right. And how does that process work?
It's a very similar process. It's a similar outcome. The difference is the attorneys would be deferring it, but when they receive the funds, they would have to pay the tax at that time. But it is a way to defer the taxes like that. But it's the same scenario. The money would have to come from the defendant and/or its insurance carrier, and there would also have to be language included in settlement documents, et cetera.
But it couldn't come directly to the attorney, could it?
No, sir. That would be constructive receipt, and the IRS would consider that taxable income.
Constructive receipt, and they would consider it taxable income. So, can you explain that just a little bit more for me?
Well, if they receive the money, then the IRS is going to consider that taxable at the time it hits their account, and therefore undoing that is going to be quite a bit of a problem.
And so then they would get taxed on all of that money, correct?
That is correct.
As opposed to just the amount of money that they wanted to get that year.
That is correct.
And you indicated that it would be deferred taxation. So to use an example, let's say I represent somebody on a big suit and get $1 million in attorney's fees. If I were to structure it, I could have that stretched out over 10 years, $100,000 a year, and then am I hearing it correctly? I wouldn't get taxed on $1 million all at once. I would get taxed on that $100,000 a year each year for those next 10 years. Is that a good way of describing it?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And as a result, pay less in taxes.
That's the goal.
Are you familiar with an individual by the name of Richard Alexander Murdaugh?
I am.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for me?
Wearing a checked shirt and a blue jacket, appears.
Let the record show that he identified Mr. Murdaugh. When did you first meet Mr. Murdaugh?
Probably 20 years ago, give or take a few years, 20 years ago. Probably at a convention or a continuing education seminar, since our primary market are plaintiffs' attorneys.
And what was your first impression of Mr. Murdaugh?
Very jovial, friendly. Never met a stranger. Just a generally nice guy.
Did you have occasion to work with Mr. Murdaugh more going forward from that point in time?
I did. As generally speaking, as we get to know our clients, a lot of times friendships get born out of that, and you get more comfortable dealing with them. And so yes, I worked with his firm a great deal. Did a lot of work with his firm. I probably actively would work. I've worked probably 5 cases with Mr. Murdaugh.
Now, in terms of those at his firm, did you work with Alec on a lot of cases or relatively few cases compared to his partners?
If you compare it to his partners, relatively few.
So most of the time you were working with the other folks at PMPED, but Alec maybe just a handful of times. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did Alec hold any other positions other than his role at the law firm that caused you two to work with one another frequently?
Sure. At one time, he was the president of the Association for Justice, which is a voluntary organization of plaintiffs' attorneys. And so we'd be very closely together at trial lawyer events and things of that nature, CLEs.
And is there a shorthand for that organization that used to be applied to it? The
SCAJ.
SCAJ. As part of your professional relationship with Alec, what sorts of things would y'all do together?
Again, usually these would be at events. It was never really a one-off. It was usually events. Golf, dinner, lunch, things like that. Just things that you would do. Things that you would do when you're at a Hilton Head.
About how many times would you say you golf together?
I'd probably say I'd put the over-under around 15.
15?
Yeah.
And you'd go have dinner, maybe some drinks together at the conference, correct?
Not every year, but we would see each other. But, dinner was probably few and far between.
Did you ever go hang out with Mr. Murdaugh at Moselle or any of his other properties?
No, sir.
Did he ever come and hang out with you in Columbia for dinner or drinks or anything like that?
It would be business related.
Did you ever go to any sporting events with him, like a Gamecocks football game or anything like that?
I never went with him. I may have seen him there, but never went with him, no.
There's a lot of folks in the stadium at Williams-Brice on game day.
Depending on the season.
Did Mr. Murdaugh ever meet you in Columbia and deliver some checks to you and tell you, hey, these are for the clients for structures or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever meet with him halfway between Columbia and Hampton and get checks from him?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever call him and say, hey, can you bring those checks to me so that we can finance this?
Absolutely not.
And would forge under any circumstances accept client money checks personally in order to fund an annuity for them?
No, sir.
And so if you received or saw or reviewed an instrument made out to forge, and it said in the memo line, money for client or something to that effect, would that instrument be legit?
Well, it would be returned to the person that sent it to us with an explanation as to why we could not take it.
You would not take it?
No, we would not take it.
In working with Mr. Murdaugh, did you ever discuss options with him about how to structure fees for his clients?
Generally speaking, we have those conversations with attorneys, and I do remember he inquired about it, kind of went through what you would need to do, how you would need to do it, kind of the process in which it's done. So, yes.
So did you explain to him some of the things that we've explained to these folks from around the county here today?
It's the same canned elevator speech I give to everyone. This is the mechanics of how it works.
Were there any specific cases that he came to you and asked you about whether you could set up a structure?
I don't recall if there was a specific case. I do remember there was a case where we sent some options over one time and nothing ever came to fruition. It was just here's what you can do.
Do you recall the name Dion Martin?
I do recall the name Dion Martin.
What, if anything, do you recall about Dion Martin? Was that one of Alex's cases?
It was. What I recall about that case is that I got a signed option from plaintiff's counsel, signed by Mr. Dion Martin, or I'm assuming Mr. Martin, saying he wanted to set aside X amount of dollars. I'm not really sure exactly what that amount was. And he wanted to do it to an annuity. And so annuities, like anything, it's kind of based off of stock market and whatnot, so they can kind of go up and down. So there's a time window in which you are able to purchase that. If not, the rate may go up, the rate may go down. And so I consistently sent emails to Mr. Murdaugh as well as his paralegal, Annette Griswold. I would say at least 4, maybe 5 emails saying, hey, this is going to expire. This is going to expire if you don't fund this now. And after getting no response, after multiple weeks, we just closed our file.
So you did open a file for Mr. Martin, correct?
We open a file for every case, yes.
For every case, and I want to drill onto that a little bit. What prompts you to open a file?
Well, part of it is so that we can remember if the attorney calls us and says, hey, I've got a case I'm about to start working on, or we got it, and they don't give us any information because they might be in the car, we can say, okay, this is the John Smith case, and I've got that tied to an attorney. And so that's how we do that.
So if you get so much as a phone call saying, I want to talk to you about so-and-so, you make a file?
That is correct.
Even if it's just one conversation?
I always ask for a name.
Do you ask for any other information?
I asked for a great deal of information, but oftentimes that takes a little while to get. But the name is what I need first.
Are you aware of a boat collision that occurred in early of 2019 in relation to Mr. Murdaugh or his family?
I'm aware.
And are you aware of generally any litigation that resulted from that case?
I'm aware.
After that boat crash and that litigation began, did you have any further conversations with Mr. Murdaugh about structuring any fees that he might earn?
We had general conversations, generic conversations, but we never had any in-depth conversations.
He never asked any specifics beyond the general canned speech?
It was, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do.
Did he ever bring you any fees and say, hey, I would like to structure these or anything to that effect?
No, sir.
Do you recall in and around September of 2021, receiving a phone call from Lee Cope?
I do.
And what generally, well, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Mr. Cope called me, asked me if he could trust me, asked if he could trust my office as much as he trusted me, let me rephrase that, and said, I'd like to give you a name of some cases, and could you tell me what y'all have done for those clients? He gave me probably 10 to 12 names. I remember I was standing in my driveway, so I'm furiously writing down these names, hoping I could read my own handwriting. And I got back with Mr. Cope and told him I didn't have a file open on any of these people.
None of them?
Not a one.
Not a single name that he provided to you?
No, sir.
Did they follow up with you and provide you any additional names?
They did. The next day, he called me again, gave me another list of names, went through that list. The only name that stood out was Dion Martin that I referenced earlier.
Did they ask you about where Forge Consulting did its banking?
They asked me if we banked at Bank of America, and I told them we had not for the last 4 years.
Was it the last 4 years, or was it a little bit longer than that?
It was 4 to 5 years, somewhere in that range.
I jumped ahead a little bit. You are generally aware of the events of June 7th, 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I am.
When did you first become aware of the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh?
Probably early morning on June 8th, probably 5:36 in the morning. I got a couple of missed phone calls.
What did you do after learning of the murders?
Other than being stunned by it all, I let my wife know, called a few other people. I let my business partners know.
Did you reach out to anybody in relation to Mr. Murdaugh or Mr. Murdaugh himself?
I did reach out to one or two of his law partners just to express my condolences, and obviously asked, hope it wasn't true, but that was confirmed. And then I waited a day and reached out to Mr. Murdaugh and just let him know we were thinking of him, didn't have the words for what to say.
Had you ever met Paul or Maggie?
I had.
Did you know Paul very well?
I didn't know Paul very well. I knew of him, but I didn't know him very well.
How well did you know Maggie?
I knew Maggie, pretty well. She would oftentimes, I believe when Buster was in school in Columbia, she would text me and ask me where he could get his hair cut and where he could get his pants hemmed and things like that. And I was kind of like her local Google. So, but it was funny because I'd always respond to her.
You're in Columbia, Buster's in Columbia, she's in Hampton, and so she's texting you with questions.
Absolutely.
Did you attend the funeral for Paul and Maggie?
I did.
Did you see Alec there?
I did.
Did he say anything to you?
Not at the funeral, but after.
Did you go to a wake afterwards?
I did.
Did he say anything to you at the wake?
He told me how much Maggie had loved me and my wife and our family.
Between that wake and September of 2021, did you see the defendant, Mr. Murdaugh, on any other occasions?
I saw him in Hilton Head in August. That was the only time I saw him.
Where did you see him?
At the Scage conference in Hilton Head Island, the annual convention. That's all attorneys and vendors and whatnot attend.
At the lawyers' convention in
Yes.
Hilton Head?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Oh. Was anybody with him?
His brother John Marvin was with him primarily, but others were around, law firm members of the firm.
What was the scope of your interactions with Mr. Murdaugh at the convention?
We hung out a little bit, or said, exchanged pleasantries, hugs, still, couldn't believe what had happened. And we did go to dinner. I went to dinner with him, his brother, and the majority, I don't want to count them off, of his law firm on, I believe it was Saturday evening.
Now, we've talked about Forge Consulting. Are there any subsidiaries of Forge Consulting or alternative names or other companies associated with Forge?
We do have two other companies that are under the Forge umbrella. One is Advocacy Trust, which is a trust company, and the other one is Advocacy Wealth Management, which manages some FINRA and SEC-related wealth management firm.
Do you have any subsidiary? Excuse me, stumbling over my own tongue. Do you have any subsidiaries that are just named Forge?
No, sir, we do not.
Did you ever tell Mr. Murdaugh that he could use the name of Forge Consulting or Forge for his own purposes?
Absolutely not.
Prior to September of 2021, did you have any knowledge that Mr. Murdaugh was using the name of Forge for his own purposes?
No, sir.
Beg my own court's indulgence.
I'll stand for a moment.
Showing you a document that's already in evidence as State's Exhibit 335. This document says it's a Bank of America statement. Is this an account statement from a Forge Consulting account?
No, sir, it is not.
35 on the Elmo for the Jersey Sea at Richard A. Murdaugh, sole prop, DBA Forge. That's not one of your accounts?
No, sir.
No further questions for this witness.
By the defense.
Good afternoon.
You had some formal positions with the South Carolina Association of Justice?
Yes, sir.
What were those?
Did some government affairs lobbying work for them.
Okay, on a contract basis?
As an employee and as a contractor.
Okay. And at one point in time, Alex Murdaugh was the president of the South Carolina SCAJ?
Yes, sir, he was.
And were you employed at the time or contract lobbyist?
Yes, sir, I was employed at the time, yes, sir.
And part of his duties, well, I guess he was on the board for a period of time as well, right?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And the SCAJ board and the president would meet in Columbia quarterly, monthly, how often?
They would meet in Columbia probably twice a year. They normally met at the convention spots or the CLE spots, and then one was always by telephone. But usually the president was, even the telephone call, the president would come to Columbia.
And when he would come to Columbia, you remember Maggie would come with him and spend the night on those business trips?
Sometimes, yeah. I don't know specifically for for the Skage stuff, but I do. Maggie spend the night in Columbia, yes.
But you saw them traveling together in Columbia. I mean, you said you would see him in Columbia on business reasons. Was the business reasons his membership on the board and then?
I would say, generally speaking, most of the time when I would see him, it would be because of that, yes, sir.
Okay. And then he and Maggie came to you and your wife's wedding in New York, right?
They did.
And my understanding is the big day came on the day of a big blizzard.
3 feet of snow, yes, sir.
And so you had to delay the wedding a day, right?
We did.
And you got to spend a lot more time with Maggie and Alec during that period of time?
All the other guests, yes, sir.
Right. And so did at that point in time your wife became friends with Maggie and y'all became pretty good social friends?
I think so. I mean, we still didn't really hang out much after the wedding other than professional settings, and that could have been just because of the distance between the towns. But, yeah, we keep in touch, no doubt.
And then every year, I think you mentioned there's an annual convention at Hilton Head of the, we used to call it trial lawyers, but
I still do, too.
yeah, of the trial lawyers, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's usually at a hotel. It used to be at the Westin at Port Royal, I think.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
I think maybe they moved it. I don't know.
Marriott now.
Yeah. So, and there would be seminars, during the day, and then there'd be socializing in the evenings.
Yes, sir.
And it was a family event.
Very much so.
And Alec would bring Maggie and Paul and Buster.
Every time.
And you got to see him interact with his entire family.
I did.
And he was a family man, wasn't he?
By all accounts, yes, sir.
And you went to Maggie and Paul's funeral?
Yes, sir, I did.
And then after the funeral, you went out to Moselle?
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure, what was Alec's demeanor?
He was a broken man. You could tell. He was very upset. He was very upset.
And then you saw him a few months later at that convention at Hilton Head.
Yes, sir, I did.
And you said he was with his brother John Marvin.
Yes, sir.
And his son Buster was there too. You remember that?
I believe that's correct. Yes, sir.
Now John Marvin's not a lawyer, right?
He's not.
Is it unusual for John Marvin to come to the lawyer convention?
I had not seen him before. No, at the convention. No.
Right. He was there supporting his brother.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. And people were trying to lift Alec's spirits up and support him during that period of time.
I think so. Yes, sir.
Right. 1 second, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. Call your next witness.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. If you'll have a seat on the stand. If you'll state your name, just that microphone there, and spell your last name for the record.
Brian Hudak, Hudak.
Agent Hudak, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Where are you employed?
South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, also known as SLED.
All right, and what is your duties there?
I'm a special agent in computer crimes.
All right, and just briefly, what do your duties entail?
Conduct forensic examinations, cell phones, computers, vehicle infotainment modules, any sort of electronic device that can hold evidence. Also, I'm an evidence custodian for the unit.
Just a moment, sir. I have the jury go to the jury room for a recess. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to evacuate the building at this time, so we'll be in recess until we discover what's going on. We'll couple this with a lunch break until 2:30.